Okay, so I'd like to give an overview of the Buzzard Telegram bot code, um, and kind of just go through things. Hopefully, it'll make a little bit more sense. It is like relatively well documented, hopefully, but there are some aspects that maybe aren't quite so well documented. So hopefully, this video will supplement those. Um, Remember, I guess the overall goal here is to make every message sent to a Telegram channel, or is to take every message sent to a Telegram channel and post it on the Buzzard website. Um, so with that constraint in mind, um, it was like kind of like for the most part relatively easy to come up with some code that does this. Um, so we'll kind of go through the few files that I've created here that actually go through and do this. So the first is like the bot.py file, which is really the top level module, and it runs um, everything else. Config.py is really just holding configuration information. Message handler.py is when the bot receives some information, it goes and tells message handler, hey, you got a message, and it goes and handles the message as needed. And util is a folder where there's some extra utility functions or miscellaneous things like so get operations, handling URLs, as well as any other miscellaneous functions that didn't belong elsewhere. Um, so bot.py is where we actually start off, but I would like to go through just like the utility functions real quick to get them out of the way, and then go through the configuration. And then from there, we can go to the bot and then handle some messages because that's really the core of the code. Um, so we'll start in MISC, and there's this function that's called set author for channel. I guess before I do this, one important thing would be to know the general database structure of the bot, and basically it's just a mapping between, say, one author and one channel. So that means like I'm CJ, so there'll be this author CJ, and that's mapped to some channel ID, um, and that means basically what happens here is anytime there's a channel ID, it can only have one author, and anytime there's an author, it can only have one channel ID. Um, so when we're doing a set author for a channel, it's basically saying, hey, CJ belongs to some channel ID. So it's just making a pair of these numbers, author and channel ID. So that's exactly what this function is doing. This database is stored in a JSON file, and it's read into a Python bidirectional dictionary. So that's actually how we enforce that property is through that dictionary. Um, this is maybe something to change in the future, but for now, this is the case. So basically, this is just making sure that when you're trying to set an author for a channel, like that, hopefully the author and the channel don't exist, and you say, okay, great, we can set that information, save it to the DB, and save it to the Git repository, and move on with our lives. Um, Otherwise, if the channel exists or the author exists, you might send a message back to the user to say, hey, this is kind of an invalid configuration. So that's what this function is doing. It's basically this actually is like one of the main functions, surprisingly, given that it's in miscellaneous, for actually handling and updating the DB information. But really, it doesn't belong too well anywhere else. Maybe this will be called something else in the future. The next is URL. Currently, it's actually unused, but we will be using it in the future. And there's just two functions in here. It's checking whether a URL is valid due to regex, and the other is getting the URL title. And this basically does some XML parsing on the HTML page and goes and extracts the title text from it, and you call that good. Um, Next is Git, and this is basically just a few Git functions. Or a few functions to wrap some Git operations. One would be switch branch. So you might want to say, I want to go on the main branch, or I want to go on the testing branch. So this is a function that goes and performs those actions. Um, the next is add all to Git. So there's certain files that we're operating in the Buzzard GitHub directory or the Git directory. So we're just gonna basically we have this consumption folder that is the folder that all these files are getting dumped into, as well as this Telegram bot folder, and all the some configuration files are dumped in there. So we're just gonna make sure, hey, let's check out on the right branch. Let's go get the latest code, you know, add these files and commit them to the repo. The next thing is adding an author to the Git. So you're just saying, I want to create a directory for an author. Simple as that. And there's a clone Buzzard repo, which will be used in the future. And then we have our configuration. It has some basic constants to start. Most of these are actually now moved to the command line. Not all of them, but most of them have been moved. There's this allowed authors, so only certain people are actually allowed to post. We have our template loader, our environment. This is for Jinja 2, where we can basically take a markdown file and say, here's existing front matter, and just fill it in. So it looks something like this, where you have author, I want to fill this in with the actual author, and then content will be the content of the message. Simple as that. So we also have a singleton class here, so the bot config, and basically we kind of just open up, well, we initialize it and we go and find like what git directory we're supposed to be using from command line arguments, getting the API token from your bash environment or your like ZSH environment or Z shell environment, and setting the correct git branch again from command line arguments. Print config, pretty self-explanatory, just printing a bunch of variables, getting that API token again. Okay, we're going to go get it from OS, setting the git directory. This is coming from command line arguments, very basic for now. Eventually we'll use some true command line argument parser. For now, just need something simple to work. Same thing with the git branch. It can only be test of main currently. It's fine. And we have our singleton instance here, so it can be imported in any of the files, and this has no dependencies on any other files here. So now we can kind of go to the bot and go over it. So we also have a class for the bot, and this is running the overall bot. And when we initialize it, we essentially read that DB, that JSON file we were talking about earlier, to go ahead and build that bidirectional dictionary between author and channel ID. And we also set up a bunch of directories in the Buzzard GitHub Git repo. And this is just to make sure everything's initialized before we actually go and create some new files and all this. So you can see at the end of this file, we create the bot, it's the Buzzard bot, and we start the bot. So start is really like where everything begins, and we just say updater is like the Telegram updater. So you say, okay, we're going to provide this the API token, it'll log in and do whatever it needs to. And then we're going to add a handler, which is when any new message comes in, we're going to call handle update, which is a function at the bottom of this. And then we'll start polling. So anytime an update is received, it'll get hit by this handler. Stop is similar to start, except you want to stop the bot and it'll just save the existing DB just to make sure everything is up to date. Setup DIRs, again, is creating those directories properly. Read DB is just going to say, let's make sure we're switching to the main branch or whatever branch is set in the config, and then go ahead and load that DB file, and then we're good to go. Save DB similarly is, instead of reading it, is going to write it out to that file. And then finally, we have this handle update function, which is essentially like a callback function as specified by Python Telegram bot, the library that we're using to interact with Telegram. So we have our global bot instance here. This is probably not the best way to do things, but for now it works. It's simple enough. And then we're going to go ahead and dispatch this message given the bot and the update to our message handler. So in our message handler, this is the dispatch function that'll get hit. But before we go over that, let's just quickly look at this class message. And it basically just takes the raw Telegram update and processes a bunch of information out of it to flatten it up and make it a little less ugly than the raw update that's coming out of Telegram, and some things that we'll have to use, and like finding author and like finding if there's a reply, and like some basic information that's quite helpful to use throughout. So the first thing that we'll do when we actually hit that dispatch function is create that message, and then from there we're going to dispatch that message to different functions. One is like if we're handling commands, like a set command or a remove command, or if we're just handling the message itself. Handling the set command is quite similar to the miscellaneous function that we initially looked at. because all we're doing is getting some information and then calling set author for channel, and then we're good to go. Um, if the author is not in our allowed authors list, then we'll send a message to that Telegram channel saying, hey, you're not allowed to do that. That's not okay. Remove is not currently implemented, but probably I'll implement it soon. So then that leaves handle message as our last thing and last big thing. It also has a few separate cases, but it should be relatively simple. So basically, the first thing we do is just make sure this is going to be a message sent to the Telegram channel that you're trying to put on Buzzard for sure. Like that's the use case here. So now, if there's no author in this channel, there's nothing we can do, and we don't want to throw an error. So we're just gonna send a message like, hey, you need to set this channel up, basically. Um, the next thing we do is we try to figure out, since earlier we looked through our message and figured out if this is a reply message or a brand new message. If it has this reply ID, then we know that this is a reply, so we'll handle it as a reply. Otherwise, we'll handle it as a new message and create a new file. And finally, like once we've handled that properly, we'll just add everything to Git and call it a day. So first, let's look at handling a new message. Basically, all we do is we create a new file with a file name, and the message ID in particular is very important here. And we open our template that we looked at earlier and add the author and add the content, write it out to the file, boom, done. We have the file and we add it to Git. The reply is slightly different, where now we're going to take, we want to find the message, like the previous message, like what are we replying to? So what we do is we go and look through our entire directory of all these markdown files for our author, and we say, let's get that number, that message ID. We saved it in the file name, so let's get that number and find it. So once we find it, we say, great, we found the file. Now we want to open that file that we found, the one that we're replying to, and we're going to open it as append. So then we just go ahead and write the new message in, and we have like a little bit of a format here. Just add a couple new lines, make sure it's formatted all nicely. We give it the date that this is getting added, as well as the actual message content that's going in. Boom, done. So that's like the real like basic overview of what's going on. I mean, essentially, like a lot of this can be ignored. It really comes down to the bot and the message handler. These are the two big ones. The bot is just listening for these Telegram updates. The message handler is actually receiving the Telegram updates and doing something. So that's my little overview of the code here.